Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and it's time for another book haul. This will probably be the last book haul until my birthday in July. And I think I mentioned that in my last video where I said there was like one more to come. Well, here it is. And yeah, I've got some good books to share with you today, but I feel like this is the book haul where I stepped slightly outside my comfort zone. Kind of, sort of, not really. I mean, I'm hoping actually not massively, but we'll see. And basically, what I did was I really decided to go full into checking out some small indie presses and looking at some prize lists that I haven't looked at before, going for some slightly more recently published books. There's still a few classics in here, don't worry. And yeah, just looking at some books that I'm interested in, but aren't necessarily the books I would typically have on my bookshelf. I don't know. Is that true? I'm looking at my bookshelf behind me and there's all sorts of things on there. Let's just be real. Anyway, let's get into it. You can see some of the spoiler stack right there. Don't look if you don't want to know what's coming. And yeah, I'm going to share with you what these books are about. I will maybe share the first sentence and I should stop talking and start sharing the books with you. Otherwise, this video is just going to be really long. All right, the first book that you could see there is Two Sherpas. I'm just going to move slightly to just make the rest of it a little bit of a surprise. All right, here we go. Two Sherpas. This is a translated work, and yeah, I am really interested in this. And let's see what it says it's about, because I only vaguely recall. I know there's like two Sherpas, a mountainside, a man hanging, maybe some philosophical discussion going on while he's hanging, which I already feel like there's ethical problems with. Let's read the back. If a man tries to climb, nope, that's not it. Okay, here we go. Here's actually a story. An Englishman has fallen from a ridge in Nepal. Ah, yes. And his guides kneel at the edge, exchanging the odd word, waiting for him to move. Oh, so he's on the ledge, not hanging from the edge. That's a big difference. And they must make a decision to descend. And in those minutes, Two Sherpas expands dizzyingly to encompass Mount Everest's place in the imagination of imperialists, Nazis, and others. And yeah, there's so many things in there that I find interesting. One, that, it's going to take place over a few minutes, is my understanding of this. So definitely some literary fiction happening here. But just like all the things that may come to mind that will go into that decision making of, do we climb down? Do we wait to see if he's still alive? Do we climb down before knowing that, because we might be saving his life, putting their own lives at risk? And I can only imagine the conversations of like what place Mount Everest has had and does have in their lives as Sherpas. And it should be really interesting. Even the formatting of it is interesting. The chapters look like they're very short and there's quite a few of them. And I'm ready to get into it. And I love this repeated pattern. I have a painting in my own home that I made that the underlying of the painting is just the shape. And so, yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan already. So let us read apparently chapter 1 together. Two Sherpas peer into the abyss. Well, that's the first sentence. That's all you get. And yeah, wow, that sets the stage right there. So wow, I want to pick this up soon. Okay, next up I have my therapist says this grief journal is a good idea. And I'm going to be honest, I'll read the back to you in a second so you know what it's about, or at least as little about it as I do. But I feel like I'm hoping that this is going to be my Catcher in the Rye redemption, if I recall correctly. Let me read the back for you. You could say Kyle Jr. grew up in a dysfunctional family. That'd be an understatement. His mother's wealthy family disinherited her for marrying the working class Kyle Sr., and she's never forgiven him or KJ for that. And then his life gets turned upside down. I'm not going to share why. And he obviously goes to a therapist who suggests that he does a grief journal. And he includes in there plenty, and this was the part that made me think Catcher in the Rye, plenty of sarcasm, excerpts from sweary, puny high school short stories, and fourth wall breaking asides. Through all the bravado and swagger, a portrait emerges of a young man confronting a dark past with genuine compassion and keen insight. And yeah, I have no reason whatsoever to think that this is going to be in any way like Catcher in the Rye, but I have to admit that that's what it sounded like to me, and I didn't like Catcher in the Rye, but I could see how people could, and I wanted to like it more than I did. So I'm hoping that this is going to be it for me. So let's read the first sentence and see if, it's feeling good. June 3rd, 2019. In my 15th year, my father and I started building the house in which he would eventually off himself. He doesn't use the word off, but yeah, it seems like it's going to be heavy. I'm hoping that it's going to be informative, that you're going to get a narrator that at least I can relate to or empathize with more than I could Holden Caulfield. Um, and hopefully this book will help me see if it was really Catcher in the Rye or if it's just like this genre and narrator style that I just don't like. I don't know. I don't know how similar they will be given that it's a journal. But I also think that's an interesting approach to getting out the same information with a first person narrator. So I'm looking forward to this. I don't know, because it also seems like it's going to be very heavy, but I'm hoping it's also going to be like some humor in it. We'll see. Okay, then I went totally like AWOL from my normal situation and setting, and I picked up Sour Cherry. And believe it or not, this has been a book that's been on my TBR for a little bit, even before I saw it in the bookstore. And Sour Cherry, why is this outside my comfort zone? Because it's horror. Now, I have apparently read some horror and picked it up and read it. Have I liked it? I'm gonna have to actually look back and see if I can figure that out. So that video might be coming when I finally go to read this. But it says a folk tale, a whisper, and a dream all at once. That's the blurb on the front. And what is Sour Cherry about? The tale begins with Agnes. After losing her baby, Agnes is called to the great manor house to nurse the local lord's baby boy. But something is wrong with the child. His nails grow too fast, his skin smells of soil, and his eyes remind her of the dark forest. As he grows into a boy, then into a man, a plague seems to follow him everywhere. Trees wither at the roots, fruits rot on their branches, and the town turns against him. The man takes a wife who bears him a son, but tragedy strikes in cycles. Every woman he touches becomes a ghost. The ghosts can all agree on one thing, an inescapable truth about this man. I mean, it goes on, but do we need to know more? Like, what is about to happen in this book? What is this book about to say? And apparently, it confronts the age old system of gender and power and long held excuses made for the bad man. I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm intrigued. I'm so intrigued, and my hopes are so high. And like this crazy vintage picture, and that her hair is like wrapped around the R. Like, what does this even mean? What is what? Let's just read the first page. Also, some of the pages in here are like black. Do you see that? There's like a border. Why? I don't know. But let's read this first sentence. Dawn. Through the window, pour light. This is a fairy tale. Okay, that was two sentences, but the second sentence totally made it. Let's not lie. Sour Cherry. Coming up. When is it coming up? I don't know. Okay, the next book. I picked this book up because it was a book that got on my TBR towards the end of last year or last summer when I was doing the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do. Proved way too hard for me. I failed at it. But I did like it. And one of the things that it had you do was you had to choose a book and then I think read three other books based on the blurbs on that book. And The City of Good Death is one of the books that I should have read. And I never got to it, but I was kind of sad about it. And it did stay on my TBR list, wish list, because it's fantasy and the premise sounded very fascinating. And I was like, this sounds like a book that if I had known about it, would have gotten on my TBR anyway. And so I finally randomly came across it in a store and was like, oh yeah. Okay, so what is this one about? As the dutiful manager of a death hostel in India's holy city of Banaras, Pramesh Prasad tends to dying pilgrims who hope to be released from the cycle of reincarnation. But when a dead man identical to the manager shows up in the river and an unwelcome guest takes up residence in the hostel, Pramesh is forced to confront his own ideas about death, rebirth, and redemption. love it, love the themes, love the conversation, really interested that there's like a little bit of a mystery happening in the background. And like I said, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a book of fantasy or magical realism, though I also feel like based on some of the stuff that I've read about this book, I'm not sure that that's truly the case. So we'll see once I get reading it. Oh, it comes with a character list, which is always helpful. And let's see what sentence one says. Well, there's a little bit of a prologue, and then part one starts. We're just going to go with chapter one in part one. When the boatman found the body in the river, they should have thought nothing of it. Well, then I wonder why they did think something of it. And anyway, are those the boatmen? Are they looking for the body? Are they going to find it in the body? I don't know. But yeah, I'm interested in this story for reasons that I'm not totally sure why. But I think just the topics sound like things that I'd like to think about. I did pick up a couple of classics, as I said. In fact, I have two to talk about. And the first one is Effi Briest. And this is put out by Pushkin Press, which I think is doing a very nice job of packaging some classics very nicely. And I feel like, if I am correct, that they are trying to publish not just some well-known classics, but also some that are really well but don't always stay in print. And this is one, and I would agree with them. Like, Effi Briest is, I feel like, fairly well known, but it's not a Victorian classic, and that already means that it's going to struggle to stay in print, it seems like. And it's also a translated classic. And I actually started reading this book because I have a different edition of it, and I started reading it a couple months ago or something like that. But there was a lot of historical context that I just wasn't understanding, so I wanted to pick up a different version that had slightly more notes in it. And this one does. Um, it has a lot more notes in it than my other one did, which I think had practically no notes in it. And there's not a ton. Like, the notes are just these handful of pages here, but that's still more than I had before, and hopefully it provides me a little more context. Anyway, this is about Effi Briest. I'm not going to read the back because I can already see that it says more than the other one does, who is 17 and she is coming of marital age. I believe this book was compared to Madame Bovary. I could be totally wrong on that. So don't quote me on that. But I am interested in reading this. And I believe this is a work of German literature. Yeah, German. I was right. And the first sentence says, to the front of Hohenkremmen, country seat of the von Briest family, since the time of Elector George Wilhelm, bright sunshine fell on the midday silence in the village street, while on the side facing the park and gardens a wing built on at right angles cast its broad shadow first on a white and green flagstone path, then out over a large rundle of flowers with a sundial at its center and a border of canna lilies and rhubarb round the edge. Okay, somebody forgot to tell this person to like include sentences, and I don't mean the translator. Like, I've read it in other translations, and that first sentence is always that long. Like, what happened, the door? Like, yikes. Anyway, that was another reason that I was like, I need a different version of this book, because if I'm going to have to struggle through ridiculously long sentences, and there was only one comma, guys, that I at least should have more notes on what's happening historically, contextually, etc., etc., etc. The other classic I picked up at a totally different time was also put out by Pushkin Press, and this one is Such Sweet Tender. Nope, Such Sweet Thunder. I knew that was wrong. And this is about Amerigo Jones, who grows up poor but surrounded by love in Jazz Age Kansas City, which I just think is a very fascinating time period. A precocious young dreamer, he longs for the college education that his parents could not have. But as Amerigo begins to venture further away from his doting mother and father, he encounters a world marred by prejudice where, amid the bustle and beauty, violence and injustice stalk the streets. A majestic and unforgettable child's eye view of Jim Crow America from a powerful chronicler of American family life. And since picking up this book and looking for more information about it, I found a lot of things that really fascinated me, but I'm very interested in the child's perspective of the Jim Crow America, as well as just there was some aspect of this that kind of reminded me of both Black Boy and Invisible Man to some extent. So I am looking forward to reading this when I get to it. And let's see how this book starts. I can already see the sentences are shorter, so that's promising. It says, on a cold winter morning, shortly before dawn in the year 1944, the stars shone brightly, but were now and again obscured by drifts of heavy clouds. Nice scene setting. Okay, we're on to our second stack, and I'm going to start with Your Absence is Darkness. This was nominated this year? Yeah, for this year's Republic of Consciousness Prize. I think the UK Canada one. And one, beautiful cover. And two, I've heard people say a lot of really positive things about this. So let me tell you what it's about. It says, a man comes to awareness in a cold church in the Icelandic countryside, not knowing who he is, why he's there, or how he arrived, with the stranger staring mockingly from a few pews back. Startled by the man's cryptic questions, he leaves and plunges into a history spanning centuries, a past pressed into his genes that sinks him closer to some knowledge of himself. Then it talks about a couple of different characters as well, because I believe there's more than one protagonist in here, might even be different points of view, but it says, faced with the violence of fate and the effects of choices made and avoided that cascade between them, each discovers the cost of following the magnetic needle of the heart. And I love that, like just the impact of the different choices you make and the outcomes that it has on your life, maybe other people's lives, but then also exploring that from multiple different perspectives. And I'm sure that these multiple different narratives are going to overlap. And yeah, I'm wondering where the title comes in to play in all of this. So I'm guessing that this is going to feel like interconnected short stories, that I don't think I've heard anybody say that about this, but partially because from the few reviews I've listened to, I only listened to part of them because I only partially wanted to know what the book is about, and they all said enough to make me like pick it up and buy it and want to read it. At least the first part says, tell my story and I'll get my name back, or in other words, the first opposition. And that is just like the opening to the chapter. And I'll read this. I don't know if this is the beginning of the story or not, but it's, at the start. And it says, what matters and has a lasting effect on you? Deep feelings, difficult experiences, trauma, intense happiness, hardship, or violence that cuts into your community or world can work its way so deeply into you that it's pressed into the genes, which then carry it from generation to generation, thus shaping those yet to be born. It's a law of nature. Ooh, at least exploring that idea of like just generationally the impacts that different life experiences have on you and those in your family for generations to come. Oh, yes, I'm going to enjoy this. The next one is a fun book, and fun in terms of just even the format of the book, which kind of falls into the idea of ergopic fiction. And I'm thinking of like XX that I read last month or the month before, which is something that I really just enjoy. Like, I like reading physical books because I like physically holding on to it. And I'm realizing I also like it if the book asks me to do different things with the book itself. And so that is one of the reasons that I picked up To and Fro by Leah Hager. This is about two women, and you can read the book starting here, or you can read it starting from this end. And it's about two different women's lives, and as the story goes on, their lives then overlap and interconnect. And my understanding about how this story is read is that it doesn't matter which side you start from, but it may change your reading experience. And then the other interesting thing I thought about this book was that as you get towards the middle of the story, you then have both of their stories on one page. And in one side, it's reading this way, and the other, it's going that way. And I'm guessing that's when the two characters meet or something like that. And the other fun part that I just noticed right now is that it does tell you when to flip the book so that you can read the other section. And you would then start from the other side. And so just that idea of like how different a story is based on like where you start and like whose story gets told to you first or what information you have first. This is a book that I feel like is just going to guarantee you're going to read it twice. So Yeah. I forgot that I did pick up another classic. This is a classic work of sci-fi, I guess you would consider that. It's a classic novel. It was written and first published, I believe, in 1884, so it's a classic no matter which way you slice it. And that is Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. Oh, but before I talk about this, I just realized I didn't read you the beginning. Which one do you want? Which one should we go for? Which one would I read first? Probably the yellow side? Let's go for it. Let's see how it starts. Ooh, and both sides start with an invitation. So why don't I read that? Because I'm pretty sure the invitation is the same in both. And it says, start here or flip it around. Where nothing is lost, might something be found. A sign, a message, a coin, a guess, a mirror to break the brokenness. Two worlds or one, for true searches blend. Herein two beginnings with nary an end. Fun! And let's see, is it the same thing? Whoa, they're not exactly the same. Exciting. Back to Flatland. Flatland is a classic work of science fiction, fantasy, just a classic literature. I don't know. Like every site that I looked at really struggled to place this. I would say it's a classic novel that probably fell into the genre of somewhere between sci-fi and fantasy, but since those weren't really their own separate known genres at the time, it probably considered something else. And what is this book about? Well, it says, how would a creature limited to two dimensions be able to grasp the possibility of a third? Edwin A. Abbott's droll and delightful Romance of Many Dimensions explores this conundrum in the experiences of his protagonist, a square, whose linear world is invaded by an emissary sphere, bringing the gospel of the third dimension on the eve of the new millennium. Part geometry lesson, part social satire, this classic work of science fiction brilliantly succeeds in enlarging all readers' imaginations beyond the limits of our respective dimensional prejudices. And let me just read the opening line to you because I think this also just sets the tone as well as sort of helps explain the book to some extent. I also love this like sort of original cover that's included in here. Chapter 1 of The Nature of Flatland. I call our world Flatland, not because we call it so, but to make its nature clearer to you, my happy readers who are privileged to live in space. Yeah, I can't wait to read this. And it's just like a short little book, like very short because one, this Oxford World Classics tend to put a lot of notes and forwards and this and that in their books. So the entire book itself is just this little bit. And if you enjoy Flatland, do know that there is also another book that's not written by the same author, but is directly correlated to it that I think is called Sphere World. And you can often find the two bound up, in addition together. I did not. I actually had a very hard time finding the other book, but one day I will. But probably not until after I've read this one. Another book that I picked up that I recently started re-looking for when I was looking at more indie presses and that kind of thing is actually a book that has been on my TBR for a while. It is a work of fantasy, and I believe it was nominated for probably the Republic of Consciousness Prize quite a few years ago, and that book is Mordew. And I, for the life of me, can't remember exactly what it was that drew me into like being like, yes, this absolutely has to go on my TBR. But I trust old me, and so I refuse to read a significant amount about this book and rediscover why it's on there. Will I regret that? Maybe. In the meantime, on the back it says, in the slums of the sea-battered city, a young boy called Nathan Treves lives with his parents, eking out a meager existence by picking treasures from the living mud and the half-formed, short-lived creatures it spawns, until one day his desperate mother sells him to the mysterious Master of Mordew. The Master derives his magical power from feeding on the corpse of God. That's what it's called. It's just God. But Nathan, despite his fear and lowly station, has his own strength, and it is greater than the Master has ever known. And this just sounds like it's going to get into so many conversations about so many things. There is a lovely map. This book has now been out so long since I first added it to my TBR that I think there's now 3 or 4 books in the series. Is that a danger because it's part of a series? Yes. But originally the first book came out, and on its own was nominated for a book prize. So I feel like that might work out in my favor. The other thing I like about it is right up front, they have a character list. They tell you that there's a glossary at the back so that people like me don't end up finding that after having struggled through the entire book. Thank you. And the first sentence says, the southern slums of the great city of Mordew shook to the concussion of waves and firebirds crashing against the seawall. Sounds like it's going to be an interesting city. And just in scanning down the place, I saw the words, he was walking to the circus. I love a good circus in a book, so I have high hopes. I also got a big chunky book, because of course I did, and that's The Case of Sim. This was again listed this year for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, and while it does seem like it's going to have some politics in the book, it is also formatted in such an interesting way that I just couldn't help myself. So, in short, this book takes place in the late 1400s. It is set within the Ottoman Empire, and the ruler there at the time, the Sultan, dies at the very beginning of the book. Like, that's like the first, second, or third sentence. And he has two sons. And there's one that it seems like is likely to take over, which is, of course, the older son. But then, sort of the scheming people that seem to always surround monarchs start trying to convince people that it's actually the younger son who should come into power. Now, that in and of itself was not enough to make me curious about this book, though it always sounds good. Like, the politics always sound good, especially the scheming side of it. But what really got me to want to read this book was the fact that, one, it's set in the Ottoman Empire, so it's a very different setting that I feel like I usually hear about or read about and end up finding in books that have, that going on in it. It's also historical fiction versus fantasy, which tends to work out better for me sometimes. And then the main thing is that the point of view of this story changes. It's told in a few parts. I don't know how many parts, but each different part of this book is told by a different person, each of who is making the case of Sim, as in they're making a case for why he should be the one who comes to power instead of his brother. That's my understanding. If I'm wrong, correct me below in the comments, but that got me excited to read it, so hopefully I don't regret those choices. The thing that I find funny about this book, though, is that relatively speaking, it has very large print and decent sized margins. So if you are, put off by the size of the book, don't worry. Like, compared to, let's say, compared to Flatland, like, hopefully you can tell that there's a huge difference in print size. Basically, this is big enough that I could read this without my glasses on, which I appreciate because sometimes that's necessary or just preferred. So I'm looking forward to it. As soon as I heard about that book when they released the long list or the short list for the prize, I was like, oh, yes, 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 but no, no, no. And the more I keep hearing about it, the more I want to read it. And now I finally own it. And the very last book on my list is a work of nonfiction, which is definitely a bit outside my comfort zone, as is, a book full of politics and politicking people. But this is the book that I'm trying to figure out, and hoping is going to help me figure out whether or not I like memoirs or not. Though ironically, it's not a memoir. The book is Cleopatra, A Life, and this is a work of nonfiction, and it is about Cleopatra's life. But the reason I'm hoping that this is going to help me figure out my memoir issue is that I think I like books that are about people. But I feel like I've read a lot more memoirs this year and in the last few months than I have in a long time, and I've only kind of sort of been enjoying them. So I recently decided that maybe the issue is that I don't like reading memoirs. Like, I like reading books about people, but just not memoirs. So I decided, well, why don't I read something that's more like a biography that's also about someone who's been long dead and see if that makes a difference. And if I don't like this, then maybe I just really don't like reading about people as much as I thought I would. Anyway, let me tell you what Cleopatra itself is about. I mean, in fact, it should be pretty obvious. The book is about Cleopatra from Egypt. But why I wanted to read this particular book about her is that it says that Cleopatra has gone down in history for all the wrong reasons. And in a masterly return to the classical sources, Stacy Schiff boldly separates fact from fiction to rescue the magnetic queen whose death ushered in a new world order. So there are a lot of things in here about Cleopatra that somehow I like never heard or don't remember, despite the fact that in college I took an ancient Egypt class. But obviously we only spent so much time on Cleopatra. But just the fact that she had children by Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, I didn't know that. Did I? I don't think I did. Um, she has a much more fascinating life than I feel like tends to be talked about. In fact, really the only image that I feel like ever truly sticks in my mind is like the one sculpture of her head that we always see that may or may not actually be Cleopatra, and then also Elizabeth Taylor. Like, I mean, does she come to mind every time you think of Cleopatra? Please let me know I'm not the only one. Was she even playing Cleopatra in whatever movie that was? I've never actually seen the movie. I've just seen the picture. Do you know what I'm talking about? Hopefully I'll be able to find it and put it up on the screen for you. Anyway, gather together, because that's my book haul. So here we go. Lots of different things to check out. Not my normal things, though some of them are, but I feel like in a lot of ways they all are. I mean, I still have science fiction, I've got some literary fiction, I've got some classics, I've got some things that are like classics I'd like to read. I feel like I'm just sort of playing around with the types of books that I normally read and just trying them from different angles. I think that was my goal as I picked these up, though I wasn't aware of it at the time. But I am excited to read all of these. Let me know if you've read any of them, and let me know if you've hauled any books recently that you are really looking forward to. And I will talk to you next time. I'm amazed I was able to wave.